Hey, this is Writer's Row. I'm DC Wright-Hammer, and I've brought Meg Trast back onto the show. We want to talk story, actually character development, and we're going to get outside of books to some extent. We're going to talk TV shows, and I'll let Meg talk about the two TV shows we're going to dig into, and we'll go from there.
So we're going to start with one of my absolute favorite things to complain about, which is the televised version of Game of Thrones, and how the writers really set themselves up to be jumping the shark for all of eternity on that one.
And that'll be the fun part in the beginning. And then we want to offer a better example of TV character arcs and storytelling with the show
Breaking Bad.
Oh, yeah. So, that being said, spoiler alert. I feel like we've reached the statute of limitations on both shows. However, stop watching now if you don't want to be spoiled. And with that said, we'll dig into Game of Thrones. We picked two characters, Meg, right, that we want to talk about?
Yep.
So, Daenerys Targaryen, she is one of the main protagonists for much of the show. I guess give a quick background on what she went through, and then let's talk about towards the end.
So this character is almost set up for failure in the television series, and there's also a big divide, I guess, if you want to talk about what happens early on in the books and what happens early on in the television show. From her relationship with Khal Drogo, which is far more tense and abusive in the series than it is in the books, which could just be a problem of modern television writing. We talked about the writers for that show having some bad decision-making abilities. But ultimately, the biggest problem arose when we get a heel turn from Daenerys, who has been set up to be the hero from the beginning of the story.
Right. Yeah, so there's a lot of struggle that she goes through, right? Where we could see her being shaped and morphed as a protagonist, put in some tough decisions, making tough decisions, and you don't always agree 100%, but often you come away through at least season 6 for the most part, understanding where she's coming from, agreeing with a lot of the things she's doing, and the things you don't agree with, you're like, okay, I could kind of see I could go either way on that.
She employs a very strict policy of nonviolence except against oppressors in the beginning. And by the time we get to season 7, she has already kind of gone off that original game plan. But not so much that it's concerning right until the last few episodes of the final season.
Right.
Where we see her suddenly have a blatant disregard for people who are victims of oppression, which helping victims of oppression to move out of their oppressive states has been her primary goal all through the season up to that point.
Right. And there's times when it makes sense to have a character snap and go completely against everything you set up. I think that's very effective in a lot of different stories where, it's sort of, there to some extent, bait and switch, like on purpose for a storytelling effect.
And there could have been a lot of merit to Daenerys Targaryen having that sudden snap when you look at her family lineage. Her brother was an incestuous molester, and her father was literally the Mad King,
right.
Who brought the kingdom down. So there's a lot of really good setup if we had seen any similarities between her and those family members up to that point.
Or even 2 or 3 episodes of traumatic things happening and some flashbacks or some memories that aren't hers or something like you could totally have set that up without too much production cost and without cutting out much of anything else. And then, there's this moment in one of the last episodes where it literally is just like 45 seconds of her flying on a dragon, and then she just decides to be the villain just suddenly.
Exactly.
Just and
so out of the blue.
No reason in the back. Like, you could go to Melisandre being killed, like, just a little bit. That's not enough to really put someone over the edge. You've got it's literally like going to Vegas and blowing your entire net worth because you lost a friend. Like, okay, yeah, you can build that story, you can tell that story, but you've got to give us something else. We don't get internal dialogue in TV shows like we do in books, where you can spend paragraph upon paragraph showing the decline of somebody's decision-making abilities. We didn't get that here. We got her making a silly, ugly face for like 45 seconds while flying her dragon. And
there was one scene prior to that, and it's when she executes the spider.
Varys, that's right. Not
yeah. And it's like, oh, maybe she is really starting to let the power go to her head. But then to go from executing a possible mutineer to burning down villages of innocent people.
Right.
Like, that it's not enough when we've seen her be compassionate and make the compassionate decision for so long up to that point.
Well, and it actually flips their character arcs, right? Because in the beginning, Varys was a spider. Varys was this
very much me first.
Yeah, and you could see him playing politics, but you didn't like him very much. You can make excuses for him, but still, if he would have died in the first 3 or 4 seasons, you wouldn't really bat it as much of an eye. By the time you get to where he was, he also had his character arc of being a protagonist. In the books, it's much more overt that he wanted Daenerys to come to power anyway. So they set that up as time goes on, and he kind of disappears later on in the books. But in this, like, yeah, he finally realizes he was wrong because of the direction that Daenerys' character took, and so he actually is staying true to his arc of, now I have to go against this person that I thought was going to be the savior. And, even that, they had built up enough story credence with me that I'm like, oh, I felt for Varys. I felt that was a touching moment. I wish they would have circumvented my expectations, because it's pretty much like Varys needs to die, so then Varys dies.
Right.
There was no twist or turn to that. So.
And I know that there was some Reddit forum that sort of predicted what the turn of events was going to be near the end. And I know that D.B. Weiss and David Benioff saw that and decided to change things at the last minute, which I think is why we get such this half-baked plot twist, if you can call it that. Which is really just a retcon of everything that we've learned about Daenerys up to that point. And it's really honestly kind of the same for Jaime Lannister.
Right.
Who seems like he is learning how to survive outside of the palace, who seems like he is learning to rely on other people and to trust good people, and then turns around and goes right back to his sister, who he canonically abused and did not treat well.
Yeah.
In the book and in the show.
Exactly. And yeah, with Jaime, it really does seem like some writers wrote one of his episodes where his arc was becoming a protagonist, and then those writers left, and a new writer came in and said, hey, you need to wrap this up. How are you going to wrap this up? And they probably told him, you need to wrap it up by making sure he goes back to Cersei. So just make it happen in writing and manipulate these characters and send them there. Almost like first draft, what we talked about in the last episode. Like, this should have been a a branch of your story that didn't work, that proved the hypothesis wrong. That doesn't work. I need to get rid of that, and I need to write this again.
And the worst part of that, like the whole conclusion of that arc, is them just cowering and waiting for rubble to fall. When Cersei has been the most survivable character of the entire series.
Right.
She has survived things that she definitely should not have, because she has this desire to rule over the lands and to survive.
Right. She's like water. She always finds the lowest point.
Yep.
And I mean that character-wise, like she, just when we didn't think she can get any more sinister, she becomes more sinister, not only to survive, but to, usurp as much power as she can in the process. And and she did that. She did that after Ned Stark's death at the end of season 1, when that wasn't her. She didn't order that. She didn't want that to happen, and yet it still happened. And she's like, well, how can I spin this?
Yep. How can I make this work to my advantage?
To have someone that is such a mastermind, a conniving mastermind, have this passive death, just for some kind of like symbolism where her and her brother die together, like.
Which is so gross. Like, they needed to be as far away from each other as possible to have whatever healthiest arc, best arc they needed.
Or they, like, Jaime kills her, or she kills him, but dies in the process. Like, there's so many different ways to wrap that up, and I think we could spend many more hours riffing on it, and how bad it was. Let's pivot to something that might cheer us up a little bit. Breaking Bad, Walter White, I think what I appreciated is how, well, of course, but I felt like I co-signed on everything, like willingly co-signed on every decision he made up until the end. Like,
even the awful ones.
Even the bad ones. Like, the writing and the way he portrayed it made me say, yeah, I could see why he's doing that. Or, that sounds like a bad idea, but okay.
It's also, Breaking Bad is a really fun journey because it is a villain's origin story, if ever there was one.
Right.
And it is one that makes you fully empathetic with the villain. Walter White is not a good guy. He's not a good person. He is not kind. He is not empathetic. He does everything out of his own selfish motivations. And all the while all of that is happening, perfectly reasonable, empathetic people think, yeah, I kind of understand why he did that.
Right. If people have seen the movie Joker, like that was this going down into becoming insane, and it was just very heavy-handed. It was very heavy-handed. Like, yeah, there was a lot of good things in it, but like, you didn't really relate. You kind of cared for him a little bit in the beginning, but then quickly not as much.
You mostly just felt bad for him.
Right. And with Walter White, he's a chemistry teacher. And even as a chemistry teacher, I think you can, if you go back to season 1, you could see this is just who he became. This is not like he's not like teaching chemistry because of, oh, I want to help the kids and I need to instill values and all this stuff.
Yep. Nope. It was what paid the bills. And that's his ultimate motivation through the entire series. How can I take care of my family in a fiduciary fashion? Well,
and it's this invincibility complex that he ends up getting, right? Where every time he takes a next step, he finds a way to survive, which informs the next decision he makes. And he doesn't mind upping the stakes because he feels like he's going to get away with it.
Well, not only that, but Walter White is almost, by the end of the series, he becomes a man with nothing to lose.
Right.
He expects that he's going to die. That's kind of what puts all this like in motion, right? He starts selling meth because he thinks it's going to pay for his bills, and worst case scenario is it doesn't and he dies anyway.
Right.
But then he becomes successful and discovers that no amount of wealth is going to fix what's wrong inside of me. Nothing is going to fix it. I'm going to die. So in the meantime, I'm going to stay alive as long as I can. I'm going to teach these mofos a lesson. And I'm going to go out in a blaze of glory. And that is exactly what he does.
Yeah, it reminds me of someone who, has an addiction, right? And they keep taking that next hit, and and they know they have to keep upping the dosage, or it's not going to fulfill whatever it is they're trying to fulfill. And he keeps going back to that well until, you're right, he has nothing to lose. He has bargained everything away. He's living alone. All these things, and everyone's still picking up the pieces from the mess he made. And I'm still rooting for the guy. Why am I still rooting for him?
You hate him.
Yes.
You hate him. He's awful, but you're like, you kill him. You get that.
And I think then the opposite sort of character arc, the rise of Walter White, accompanies the descent of Jesse Pinkman.
Jesse Pinkman became someone that I deeply cared for and just wanted to give a blanket and some cookies to. By the end of the show, he's this punk ass, good for nothing, high school dropout pot dealer who lives, in his parents' basement. He doesn't contribute anything, and like, not that dealing pot's even a bad thing, especially in 2021. Just that he doesn't really have any marketable skills or any motivation to be anything. He likes getting high and he likes hanging out with his high buddies. And then he meets Walter White and realizes, this is the path I'm on if I don't start caring. Like, I'm going to turn out like this maniac.
Right.
Trying to take out the frickin' drug cartel single-handedly.
Yeah, and I still have El Camino in my to watch list. I know that's like his that takes his.
I haven't seen it either.
So, but with his arc, like, he goes from being like teenage, like, rules don't matter, I'm gonna do whatever I want, and I'm even gonna hook up with this chemistry teacher to make some killer ass like, he had the invincibility complex in the beginning, this like shield of just, most of it was not caring. It wasn't malicious like the way Walter White becomes in the end.
Yeah.
It was more naivety. It was more, all this, but the invincibility of youth. And the farther along you go with him, the more he realizes, and he gets the shit kicked out of him, and he all this stuff comes crashing down in his world. And you feel for him. Suddenly you flipped. In the beginning, you cared so much about Walter White surviving, and and all of that passion, it goes now to Jesse Pinkman in the end.
Absolutely. And I think that we get almost the Jimmy Bond experience through Jesse Pinkman's eyes, and I think it was especially effective for me as I was about 21 or 22 when the show was airing, and just like really seeing and understanding, Jesse Pinkman has to go through, what exactly is it to take a life? And we see him experience that for the first time and realize that he has been careless. And we see Walter White experience that for the first time and watch him power trip. And then you really see the difference, the contrast between those two characters.
Yeah, and the writers being able to tie those so closely together, and
so good.
Yeah, there are some flaws in the show, but you don't notice those, you don't care about those when you get a show that knows how to, basically break up the whole series into 3 acts, and end the third act staying true while also having some surprises up your sleeve.
Yep. I think they didn't worry too much about diverting expectations,
right?
Which is something Game of Thrones did to a fault, to a literal fault.
Right.
And they worry more about wrapping up the story for the characters.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, Breaking Bad did something that a lot of books and TV shows and movies have not been able to successfully accomplish, and that is having a very, very character-driven story while still maintaining a really coherent and a plot that could be wrapped up nice and neatly at the end.
It's tough. You run the risk of seeming like you're a puppeteer and you've got marionettes and you're just moving them. And that was the problem with Game of Thrones at the end. And I think that's not because they didn't have the ability. It's because I didn't think they cared enough. By the end, you had so much going against them from time frames, budgets. They could have had longer times. They could have had a bigger budget. But they just thought they were moving on. They've been in this universe too long. It's time to move on. They just didn't care. And so write it, however we can get this wrapped up. If they would have done a fade to black, that would have been better for half the characters, and just leave us angry with that. But at least with Breaking Bad, they actually did. There was sort of a fade to black, not knowing exactly what happened at the end. But
right, but we do get a sense of closure. We see Jesse Pinkman is alive and well, and he's talking to the authorities about what happened. And Walter White's dead, which we knew was going to happen from the beginning. The show starts out with a terminal cancer diagnosis.
Yep.
So Walter White will die. But as we get closer to the end, you wonder, will the cancer take him, or will one of his insane, stupid stunts take him?
Yep.
And that's where the drama comes from, and it's wonderfully, wonderfully orchestrated.
Oh, again, we could talk forever about it, Meg. Thanks for coming. Thanks for coming on the show to chat about it and just kind of geek out about Game of Thrones and Breaking Bad.
Thanks for having me.
Anyone who's watching to this long, thank you. And we will catch you all next time.